Welcome to another Male Survivor webinar. The Blue Campaign is a national public awareness effort that works closely with the Department of Homeland Security to provide education for law enforcement and other industry partners to recognize and respond appropriately to human trafficking. It also provides educational resources designed to reduce victimization within vulnerable populations. Located within the DHS Center for Countering Human Trafficking, two foundational objectives comprise Blue Campaign's educational focus: the prevention of human trafficking and the protection of exploited persons. Michael Camal is our guest tonight. He is the Senior Engagement Manager at the U.S. Department of Homeland Security Center for Countering Human Trafficking. Mr. Camal's anti-trafficking work resulted in his selection as a 2023 finalist for the Samuel J. Hyman Service to America Medal. Originally from New Jersey, Mr. Camal holds a bachelor's degree in sociology from the University of Rhode Island. His current efforts are focused on raising awareness of human trafficking through the Blue Campaign and the Blue Lightning Initiative, an element of the DHS Blue Campaign led by the Department of Transportation and U.S. Customs and Border Protection. We want to warn our viewers about the sensitive nature of this discussion and to monitor your own well-being during the webinar. This presentation is being recorded and will be available within 10 to 14 days on our webinar site, webinarofrecovery.org. Mr. Camal, thank you for joining us tonight. I'd like to start our conversation with the definition of human trafficking. The Merriam-Webster Dictionary defines human trafficking as organized criminal activity in which human beings are treated as possessions to be controlled and exploited, parent as being forced into prostitution or involuntary labor, unparent. Is that an accurate definition with respect to the Blue Campaign?
Wally, thank you for having me and inviting me to speak on this very important webinar. That definition is in a line. You know, when you look at the definition, it kind of reads technical, but when we're talking about human trafficking, we're basically looking at someone using force, fraud, and/or coercion to coerce someone to commit some type of commercial sex act or perform some type of labor, basically against their will. So we're looking at those elements of force, fraud, or coercion for both sex trafficking and labor trafficking.
As a survivor of non-trafficking abuse or sexual abuse, how can the perspectives of my experiences and the experiences of other people who have been abused help make a difference in addressing human trafficking concerns?
One of the key elements of what I do with the Blue Campaign is what we do is we raise awareness. So we educate people on what human trafficking is, what it looks like, how to spot it, how to prevent it. And one of the big parts that we do with that awareness is we work with survivors or lived experience experts, folks who have been through human trafficking but are now out of it. And I know you had asked about non-trafficking abuse. In my mind, a survivor of anything is a good advocate when it comes to human trafficking. So if we have people who are out there who have been through human trafficking or some other type of abuse that are now out of it, and they're saying, and they're successful, and they're advocating for victims of exploitation type crimes, it helps victims self-identify, and it helps us overall address this crime.
How much of trafficking is physical force versus psychological coercion? And, without getting, too technical about it, and understanding that lines may blur or overlap. And are there differences in how those situations are approached by law enforcement and victim support professionals?
Yes, great question. So when we're looking at human trafficking, like I had said, it's force, fraud, or coercion. Most of the people, including a good majority of law enforcement, they think of the force when they think of human trafficking, people being physically abused, physically restrained. What is often forgotten about is the psychological coercion that these traffickers employ. The psychological coercion is, I've seen it in pretty much every single case I've ever seen. force, sometimes it's not included, but that psychological coercion is, and that is a little bit harder to identify. So when law enforcement is responding to human trafficking, if a law enforcement agent is not trained on human trafficking, they may look at a situation and see, okay, this person, they don't have any bruises on them. They aren't being physically restrained. They look like they're free to go about their business. So case closed, I'm walking away. But if a law enforcement officer is trained on human trafficking, they know to ask those extra questions to get down to the base of what's happening. Is someone else coercing you to do these things? Are they threatening you with violence or threatening your loved ones with violence? Do you feel like you have the freedom to leave? Or do you feel like something bad is going to happen if you don't leave? If someone is in a situation where they can't leave their work or commercial sex type deal, that very well could be human trafficking. And so it's very important to note that the psychological coercion is very often a big element of those cases, in addition to sometimes the force as well.
I'm sort of curious. That leads me into another question, which is, what do they do if they feel that there is coercion going on, and yet they keep yet the person that they're talking to is clearly too afraid to even approach admitting that they're being victimized out of fear or whatever, or shame or whatever? How do they deal with that when they walk away, having not gotten any commitments from the potential victim, and yet know that this person is being victimized?
It's a great question you just asked, and it's one of the biggest challenges that law enforcement face with human trafficking cases. And when I speak with the agents, they tell me that it often is very personally hard for them to walk away when they can't prove that a crime is happening, but in their gut, they know that this person is being victimized. The best response when it comes to law enforcement for a situation like that is to implement what we at Homeland Security call the victim-centered and trauma-informed approach. So what this approach does is we place equal value on the investigation of the traffickers as we do on the stabilization and support of the victims. If you look 23 plus years ago, human trafficking wasn't even defined as a federal law in the United States. If a law enforcement officer were to go to a victim, or they encounter a victim, their first question might be, who's your trafficker? Let's go after the trafficker. The questions we need to be asking now with the victim-centered approach is making sure that that victim has their basic needs met first, before ever talking about prosecutions or arrests or going after the trafficker. Got to make sure that that victim is safe. And sometimes it doesn't work. Most of the time, it won't work on the first interaction. I talk with these law enforcement officers. We also have what's called the victim assistance program. So we have non-law enforcement experts who are experts at dealing with victims that are employed by Homeland Security. Their sole job is to make sure that that victim is connected to support services once they're identified. Oftentimes for them, it takes them 2, 3, 4, sometimes 20 different meetings, different interactions with that victim, sometimes even more. It could be a years-long process. But what the main important fact is just implementing that victim-centered approach. So they make sure that that victim's needs are met. And when they do that, the victim is usually more likely to cooperate with law enforcement and help with the prosecution, make sure that trafficker goes to jail. But if they don't want to do that and they're an adult, that's okay too. We're still going to make sure they get the support they need. So bottom line, it's that victim-centered approach.
Wow. I wanted to mention to our attendees that we do have chat disabled, but we do have the question and answer option open. So we encourage anyone to use the question and answer option in the Zoom to ask questions, and we will try to address any question that's asked through the question and answer. Okay. So I don't know if Murray or Nathan
I
have
have
any
a question. How do people come to your service? Are they sought out, or do they seek you out, or both?
Are you talking about victims being identified by Homeland Security?
Yeah.
It is a combination of a number of different ways that we can encounter victims. Sometimes it's through law enforcement investigations, but more often than not, it's from our partners. So I think you'll hear me say this maybe more than once, is that no one organization can combat human trafficking alone. There's a lot of different players involved. So these Homeland Security offices are spread throughout the entire United States. You also have international offices, and they work very closely with the non-governmental organizations located that support victims, because our agency, we deal with not just human trafficking victims, but victims of other crimes as well. And we have to have those connections. So sometimes those non-governmental organizations will reach out to us. Sometimes we'll identify it through investigations. And other times it'll be other law enforcement partners. And in some rare cases, the victims will reach out themselves to us.
So let's say I am an undocumented immigrant, having left the country because this government did not maintain its promise to the people or whatever. How does if you come from that kind of an environment, it sort of informs perhaps a fear of law enforcement, and including a fear of deportation and the impact of I'm just sort of wondering how that impacts help-seeking behavior of victims who are undocumented.
It's a big challenge. And I'll just start by saying that majority of victims, both US citizens and foreign nationals, are usually not what we like to call outcry victims. They don't see themselves as victims. They're usually not seeking help on their own. But with undocumented folks, with people who come here, a lot of times that's a result of human smuggling, which is different than human trafficking. So someone is smuggled across the border, they make a voluntary decision to violate our country's immigration laws. Then once they're here, they're somewhat free to go about their business, albeit in an undocumented status. Trafficking, on the other hand, crime against a person. It's exploitation based. It doesn't necessarily always involve movement. But when it comes to undocumented immigrants, the traffickers, they will target those folks because they know they can exploit them easier. They can threaten them with deportation. They can threaten their families back home. Sometimes those smugglers turn into traffickers. Someone arrives in the US illegally. Once they get here, their passport's taken away. They're told, okay, now you need to work on a farm or work at this restaurant, but it's really a brothel. And if you don't, I know where your family lives and I'll hurt them. So that's a situation where smuggling can turn into trafficking. They exploit folks who are undocumented. There's sometimes a language barrier as well. But the one thing I'll also add is that with human smugglers and with human traffickers, both of these folks do not care about human life. They don't care about the well-being of the person. All they care about is the profits. And so when someone's not here legally, it puts them in a more vulnerable situation to be exploited by human traffickers.
This sounds pretty bleak, and pretty depressing. That we can have people coming into the country who are trying to flee oppression, only to find that they're further victimized. Once they're here. I have another question, and speaking just as a survivor, not as a trafficking victim, but it has to do with developing a healthy sense of boundaries and not being able to trust your own judgment. And I imagine that there are a lot of people who have a tough time trusting their own judgment when they think they see something and they're not really sure. If I witness a situation that I think may involve trafficking, but I'm not sure, how do I make a report without overstepping boundaries?
Great question. I just want to say one thing before I go into that, because we left on, it's bleak. It is terrible that we live in a world where this stuff can happen to US citizens, foreign nationals. But the one thing I will say is it's very empowering to hear from survivors, foreign national survivors, US citizen survivors that were exploited but are now out of it. And it shows that there's a way for victims to get help and that it's not all hope is lost. Like, we have a lot of resources in place so that if we identify one of these victims, we can get them out of there and get them the support they need, path to recovery. But going back to your question you just asked about, it was your question was how do I know if I should make a report or not? Is that right?
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's how do I know if I can make a report without overstepping my boundaries? What if I'm not really sure and I make a report and I end up reporting on somebody who's not trafficking at all? It just looked like that. And uh, that's pretty much the crux of my question is how do I navigate that uncertainty?
What I always tell everyone is to just report it. If you have that gut feeling that you feel like something's off and you've taken our training, you know what the indicators are, even if you just have one of those indicators, my recommendation is to report it. I say it's okay. Many of the leads that come into the Homeland Security tip line result in, or any law enforcement line for that matter, don't turn out to be what they are. But there's always, every once in a while, we get those few that come in, and had we not gotten those tips, we wouldn't have identified those victims. We wouldn't have been able to start those investigations into those traffickers. And a lot of people, they ask, well, what is the penalty for reporting something that doesn't turn out to be trafficking? My answer is there's no penalty at all. Um, Ask any good law enforcement officer, they would rather receive 100 tips and have none of them turn out to be trafficking than miss that one that someone just chose not to report. And the one thing I'll also say, because some people are like, well, I don't know if I should report it. There's also a way to report anonymously to the DHS tip line. So you can report anonymously. If you leave your information there, you might be contacted with some follow-up questions, but I would always say report, even if you just have a little inkling, if you've got enough information for law enforcement to follow up on, make that report, whether you call or submit a tip form online.
Well, when we record these things, we often add like lower thirds, which are words and information in print at the bottom third of the video, and I'll add the DHS tip line information to that. So,
Thank you.
yeah, but I thought I'd check in with Nathan. By the way, Nathan is on the board of directors, male survivor. Murray Shane is a doctor, and he is the board president, and I'm also on the board. I don't think I properly introduced ourselves, but I thought I'd check in here with Nathan and see if there were any questions yet.
Yeah, there was a couple of Q&As. I've been answering some of them, but there's a good one for you, Michael, is what are we doing kind of internationally to leverage the trainings that are available and kind of that networking that's available if it's trafficking that's, crossing our state borders and nationally?
There's quite a lot that is done internationally because, like you had mentioned, we've had cases that stick to just domestically, but we also have many cases that cross international borders, whether it's north, south, or overseas. And when it comes to law enforcement, we work very closely with our international law enforcement partners to share intelligence when we can and when the cases intersect. We actually had a case that I use in my presentations involving a 16-year-old minor from Australia who traveled to the U.S. They were able to identify her. She was chatting with someone much older than her who basically groomed her, recruited her to come to the U.S., had plans to sex traffic her. But that coordination wouldn't have happened if there wasn't an open line of communication. And then when it comes to my program with the Blue Campaign, Blue Lightning Initiative, we will help foreign governments raise awareness of human trafficking within their country. So depending on what country you go to, the human trafficking landscape looks a little bit different. The State Department publishes a report. It's called the TIP report. But you can go on there and you can look up each country and see what the government is doing to combat human trafficking and what the crime looks like in that region. And so we will do briefings for foreign governments to share best practices, some challenges that we've had with public awareness. Our public awareness campaign is very developed, I think more developed than any other country that does campaign that I've seen. And so we share best practices, some challenges we faced, lessons learned, and then we also hear from them too, to try and learn from some of the things that they do. So we do briefings with those foreign governments. We'll work with them, and through our aviation program, now we actually can partner with foreign airlines and airports. So we're working to expand and working with State Department to to get this training out to as many people as possible.
That's just fantastic to hear. And we were talking before we started our webinar about the aviation review lightning program. That was just fantastic. Can you kind of tell people about that program?
Yes, it's called the Blue Lightning Initiative. Basically, what we do, you can look us up online. We partner with aviation organizations. We train them on what the indicators are, the airport staff, and how to report it. And so we have videos. We have these airlines sign memorandum of understandings with us. It's free. We provide the training, and then we get the tips that come in afterward. And they also do awareness. So if you go and travel within much of the US, many of these airports are already putting our posters up in the bathrooms. You're seeing our terminals. You're seeing in the terminals the signage up. Like if you see human trafficking report in the bathroom, you'll see the number for the National Human Trafficking Hotline. And we've actually had some cases where victims have self-identified just by looking at a poster in the bathroom, and they wouldn't have contacted the hotline otherwise, which I think is very impressive. It just shows that this stuff is working. Maybe not every time someone goes in there, they're going to call, but if they keep on seeing it, I think we have a better chance of identifying more victims.
Great. And then I'll end you with this last question of, are we seeing a reduction in this issue of trafficking, or is it increasing? And what are some of the needs that need to be done nationwide?
If you look at the statistics show that we're seeing more human trafficking from prior years. A few years ago, I think it was 24 million victims globally. Now, a couple years later, 27 million victims globally from the International Labor Organization. And I don't necessarily know that that means that more human trafficking is happening. I personally believe that it means that we're getting better at identifying it. And so this crime is pervasive. It's everywhere. It's in every single U.S. state and territory. And it's obviously a complex question to answer. What can we do to make it better? The first step towards addressing this crime is to simply educate people on what it is. Yeah. I do a lot of presentations for the general public. Vast majority of people don't know that human smuggling is different than human trafficking. When they think that, then their common conception is that the trafficking victims are only on the southern or northern border. But we've had victims in, rural Arkansas or North Dakota, Minnesota, these places that people don't typically think of as, human trafficking hubs or what have you. But once everyone is aware of what human trafficking is, it puts us in a much better situation, and, we get more reports. And then, of course, I think even more important than awareness of indicators is prevention. So I think you were talking about how you were on a webinar teaching people about online safety. Like, that's so critically important. And when kids and parents and people who work with kids know how to do good online safety, they may not know it, but they're likely preventing their kids from getting into human trafficking situations. And I think that's even more important than, seeing it on the other side.
Michael, could you share a few of the signs of trafficking that you mentioned before, that it's part of the training, but I'm just curious what sort of signs would one look for?
There are many indicators, signs to look for. You've got your typical ones that I think are pretty obvious for many people, like someone who has bruises or appears distressed. There's also more behavior-based indicators that are a little more subtle. So we're talking about someone who maybe they don't have the freedom to communicate like other people do. Maybe they get asked a simple question. Like, we've had cases where someone get asked a question about what their last name is, or what their name is, or where they're going, and they don't know the answer. They have to call someone else to figure that out. A lot of times the victims, they'll defer to their trafficker to answer simple questions that people should know the answer to. The other indicator that we see is a non-genuine relationship. This is not based on race, but based on behavior. So we've had traffickers in the past who have posed as a victim's parent or guardian or boyfriend, girlfriend, just to get them through airport security or to, transport them to and from locations. And if you were to look at that situation, there would be a red flag. This parent doesn't look like they care for the child. This parent doesn't even know the name of the child or the birthday. And it turns out that they just met that person on that flight. So those are a couple indicators. Another big one is when someone doesn't have control of their identity documents. And then the last indicator I'll say, or this is more of a preventative indicator, is looking out for job offers that seem too good to be true. Many HSI Homeland Security agents have seen cases where the victims are reached out to by people online, promising them a job, like a modeling gig, or they could work on this construction site, and the pay seems great. They provide housing, but there's pieces to that job offer that just are too good to be true. And maybe it starts out as a legitimate modeling gig, but it turns into something like sex trafficking. So looking out for those job offers that seem too good to be true, and just knowing the basic indicators. If everyone goes to dhs.gov/blue campaign, you can see some indicators laid out. We even recently launched a video that shows what human trafficking is, and then it has some scenarios at the end that cover those indicators.
As a child who was abused by an older person who perhaps bought his or her silence by relying on shame or through threats. As adults, you know, we look back on that and see that there was a transactional element involved that bought our silence. And I'm wondering, you know, a lot of people on malesurvivor.org, you know, that's their history, and there is a transactional element involved. And I know in my case, it was a bit of a surprise to think that there was a similarity there that I never really considered before. And so I'm wondering in what ways that's similar to human trafficking. How is it similar? How is it different? And what do the comparisons and contrasts teach us about understanding the spectrum of trafficking crimes?
It's a very, very good question. It's very similar to the ways traffickers operate. It all ties back to that element of coercion. We've had human trafficking cases where they do the same thing. They rely on shame. They threaten them. They'll tell the victim that if people find out that you did these things, then they won't care about you anymore. That you'll get thrown in jail because some of these things might be illegal, or you know that the trafficker forced them to do. They use that coercion, that fear of shame. They isolate the person from their friends and family or their community. The people, sometimes it is the friends or family that are, or the friends, I do in the air quotes, or family that is doing the abuse. So it's important to keep that in mind as well. How is it different? I would say sexual abuse from human trafficking. It's very similar in the exploitative nature of it, but with human trafficking, you are talking about something being exchanged for money or something of value. So it's not just the person's doing the abuse for themselves, or they're having someone abuse that person in exchange for money or something of value, and that could be housing. It could be, the trafficker is housing that person, and then that's a part of the thing that's keeping them there. And then what was the third part of your question?
It sounds like the exchange with trafficking is more of a monetary exchange, whereas the exchange with people who may not have been trafficked but have been abused, there was also an exchange there as well, and maybe the compense was different than monetary, but it was still there. And so I'm just sort of wondering how those were different and how they were similar.
I would say similar in terms of the things that are keeping folks from leaving, the coercion, the exploit, the elements of control that they're using, and different in terms of motive, where one is strictly for money and the other is for a sick pleasure of whoever the abuser is.
Wow. And it sort of does lead into that other question that I had about traits and behaviors and other social and psychological issues that are similar or unique, to survivors of trafficking and survivors who have not been trafficked.
One common thing that I see, people probably don't think of this when they think of victim or survivor, but the common trait that I see working with mainly survivors is um, just strength in general. In order to survive in that world, you have to have a lot of strength. You have to, um, in order to get out of that situation too, you have to. It's a long. I can't speak from experience. I'm not a survivor myself, but I've just been empowered to see what those folks are able to overcome. And it's not just like they're a survivor at this point. They're doing way more. They're leaders in the movement. They're leaders in their careers, even if it's not tied to human trafficking. And so, one common theme I see among former victims that are now survivors is strength.
That's a wonderfully positive um, thing to say. You know, especially when I think about the community that we represent here at Male Survivor, is that uh, while the initial definition is one of victimization, really it becomes a definition of personal strength to be able to work through it and to be able to escape it. And then, to be able to go back and help others through it as well. Do you find that a lot of people who work with traffickers have been trafficked themselves? Uh, do you have any stories or examples of that?
Yes, I have. Um, I find that the folks that are survivors that have experienced human trafficking, that are lived experience experts, are often the best advocates and the ones that victims often most resonate with, that will actually help them get out of their situation. One example is a consultant that we've been working with for a while. Her name is Carla Solomon. I nominated her for this award in Texas called the Light the Way to End Human Trafficking Award. And what is incredible, and her story is not unique. There's many others like her that accomplish great things, but there's a level of exploitation that one goes through. Only a few years later, you see her leading this victim servicing NGO, assisting hundreds of victims. She's training law enforcement, hundreds of law enforcement, helping them with their investigations, training judicial officials. And I would never have thought that someone who was in that terrible of a situation would ever be able to get out of there, let alone make the big impact that she made. And she ended up winning that award, which is incredible. But there are a lot of female survivors that we work with. That's empowering. It's great to see. There's not as many male survivors of both sex trafficking and labor trafficking. We have a few that we work with, but I'd like to see more of that. It's perfect for your organization because it'll encourage more male victims to get help when they need to.
Why do you think that is? Why do you think that there are less male than female?
Well, first of all, people don't think of males as victims in general. There's a stigma that you're a man, you just got to tough it up. But no man or woman or anyone for that matter should have to go through human trafficking, sex trafficking, or any type of abuse, and then have it be their fault. So there's a mentality among society where we don't think of males as victims, and when you see prominent people or successful people coming out and saying, this had happened to me, but it doesn't define me, I think it makes a difference, and we got to combat that stigma because it's very dangerous, and not just for the victims themselves, but also for the victim servicing organizations. I think I go out across the country, I do these presentations, I speak with the non-governmental organizations, and usually I just like to ask them like a survey, like, hey, have you guys ever serviced a male victim of human trafficking, whether it's sex or labor? And I would say 99% of the chance, 99% of the time they say no, they've never serviced a male victim. Does that mean that there's no male victims out there? Absolutely not. We know there are male victims, but even that data I think is a little bit skewed because it doesn't account for the folks that that don't get that don't self-identify or don't get seen.
And it's actually perfect timing, Michael. We actually had a question come in, and I'll just read it for you. As a trafficking survivor and mental health professional, how can I get more involved in advocating for other survivors through organizations like yours?
That's a great question. So if you email bluecampaign@hsi.dhs.gov, I'd love to take a look at your resume. We have a consultant network of human trafficking survivors that we could, consider you as a part of. We compensate survivors for their time to provide expertise and review our materials. But other things that you can do is be a force multiplier. Our campaign, we're just a team of 6, 7 people in Washington, D.C., but we have a mission to reach millions. Every single U.S. Citizen, every person here, foreign national, we want to reach them. And so the only way we do that is through force multiplying. We want folks to spread awareness, go on our website, share our materials. And then the National Human Trafficking Hotline actually has a referral directory. So you type in your zip code, and it'll come up with a list of non-governmental NGOs that support victims in your local area. And they could always use the help. You can call them, volunteer, or even, get a job there as well.
I understand much of the trafficking is sort of functions through social media in some ways. Is there any effort to track them through social media, and just as there is for a lot of predators are using social media to reach victims of, and so I assume the same thing would be for sex trafficking, any kind of trafficking.
Oh yeah, social media is a big issue when it comes to human trafficking. With sex trafficking, there was a backpages.com, if people remember that, was used a lot for sex trafficking. There was a big investigation with HSI, FBI, and others where they were able to take that website down. And when they took that website down, a whole bunch of other ones just popped up. And those are the websites where they advertise people. But that's not always where these traffickers are going. They're going on gaming platforms like Xbox, PlayStation, anywhere where you can communicate with minors. They're going on there. They're going on YouTube streaming. They're going on, like I said, gaming apps, Facebook, Instagram, X, Twitter. And so the online safety education piece is so important for our kids, for adults that work with youth. And yes, law enforcement can use social media to help go after the traffickers, identify victims. And the other organization that's using that in a good way is the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. They are using social media to identify missing children, and many of those missing children are very much at risk of being trafficked as well.
You had mentioned earlier about the global increase in trafficking, and had mentioned how it may not actually be a real increase, but maybe just reflecting that we're seeing more of it. And I'm just wondering, it just sort of occurred to me as you were talking about that, how much of media had to do with that.
Media, in my opinion, media can be the greatest asset to spotting human trafficking, and also its worst enemy. It depends. I've seen some great articles that talk about human trafficking accurately, and then I've also seen some others that kind of just want to focus on the most extremes, whatever will get the most clicks, which might not be the most realistic. So I think it's important also for members of the media to get this human trafficking awareness training. But one positive example is just this past January 11th, we hosted our Wear Blue Day, which is you just wear blue in support of raising awareness of human trafficking. And it started off as a small thing with barely anyone participating, and now we get hundreds of millions of impressions, and I think thousands of people participated. And that's a great first step towards the awareness piece that I was talking about, is getting people, hey, what is this Wear Blue Day? And then they click on our website, they learn more.
I have another question for you. And I sort of going back to a definition of human trafficking that the United Nations put forward, and quote, the recruitment, transportation, transfer, harboring, or receipt of people through force, fraud, or deception with the aim of exploiting them for profit, unquote. And we know that abuse is facilitated by socioeconomic and other gradients, is across a gradient, such as adult, child, teacher, student, employer, employee. Without getting into the politics of the situation, the translocation of migrants to sanctuary cities under state government authority, in at least a couple of cases, seems to meet both the UN's definition of trafficking and the gradients that facilitate abuse. And so I'm wondering if there's a fundamental societal level issue with the trafficking of human beings that runs counter to our efforts to address it. I'm just wondering how steep that is into some of the DNA of the country and our policies.
Well, that's a good question you raised there. And I just want to be clear about human trafficking within the United States. The definition involves, like I said, force, fraud, or coercion to exploit someone for labor or commercial sex. So when you're talking about undocumented people that came here illegally that are traveling to any city within the US, they're basically there in an undocumented status. Doesn't necessarily mean they're being coerced or forced to work or commit commercial sex acts. But what I will say is that regardless of where they are in the US, they're at risk if they're undocumented, because the traffickers, the smugglers, they know that, and they can take advantage of that. So, it's a little bit complicated when you're talking about migrants coming here. But what we do is we raise awareness at the borders for the folks that come here. And then what Homeland Security also has at our disposal is immigration relief options to non-citizen victims of human trafficking. So if we identify a victim, there's a way for them to legally stay here while their case is ongoing and potentially after, which a lot of other countries don't necessarily have. But that UN definition, it's similar to the US one, but the one difference I would say is that transportation piece. A lot of some countries it's a little bit different, but in the US, we try to make it clear that transportation is not needed for something to be trafficking. We've had victims who are exploited within their own home by an uncle, by a parent, by a foster parent. They never even leave their town, or they never even leave their city. They're US citizens, they're foreign nationals. So I just try to make that distinction, and understanding the vulnerabilities, I think will help us address it regardless of who's being victimized.
Do we have any more questions, Nathan? Oops, I think we might have just lost Nathan there. Oh. Nope. Yeah, we might have lost Nathan here.
No, I'm still here.
Oh.
Yeah, so
We got part of you there, Nathan. Oops, I think we lost Nathan. Okay. I could see that one happening. So, do you have any other questions, Murray?
Yeah, I'm curious to know how many or how large a segment of traffic victims are underage, since that's a big part of male survivors' experience, is that many men have been abused when they were underage. And I wonder if the same sort of statistics apply to trafficking.
They do. A good portion of the victims are minors, underage, under the age of 18. There's also a good portion that are adults. But the one element of the US law that I think is important is that with sex trafficking, anyone under the age of 18 engaged in a commercial sex act is automatically considered a victim of human trafficking, regardless of those elements of force, fraud, or coercion. So if you've got a minor who is engaged in any type of commercial sex act, regardless of if they say they wanted to do it or whatever, they are a victim of human trafficking under federal law. So there a lot more minors are identified that way. And then with what I see with our cybercrime center is that minors are very much more targeted online through sextortion and through online child sexual abuse. They'll get folks to take pictures of themselves, send it, and then exploit them that way. Sometimes that can lead to sex trafficking. But yes, a good portion of these victims are minors. They're also more vulnerable, more susceptible to what traffickers will say they have to offer. especially if they grew up in a broken home or were poor, or a number of other factors that can come into play.
What about minority status, like color or sexual orientation? Is there a sense that is a vulnerability?
It is. It definitely is. Sexual orientation, absolutely, as well as uh, folks who are minorities, and also the Native American community. We've seen alarming numbers of victims who are a part of tribal communities, as well as the murdered and missing Indigenous women. And as a result of that, we've focused our awareness efforts to not just focus on one specific demographic, but to target everyone, to have photos of males and photos of females. And we also created a poster series for the tribal areas, and also a new toolkit that we launched that we've been traveling around and doing trainings for the tribal gaming and hospitality industry. So if you're on our website, you'll see a lot of, you won't just see like one poster, one information this is what human trafficking is. You'll see many different guides that target different sectors. So one thing that people may not think about is that there are victims of human trafficking that are attending four-year college universities. No one thinks about that. So we create resources to educate the students, to educate the campus law enforcement, and those are just a couple examples.
I have a question from one of our viewers. How can someone that was trafficked in the 60s help with today's trafficking?
I would say the same way that any other survivor would be able to help. You can volunteer to work and to support victim servicing NGOs. You can provide your expertise to organizations that are looking to do anti-trafficking work. And I would say that we have survivors on our network that were trafficked long times ago, and their input is still invaluable. It's still so important to our work and to what we do. So whether you're a survivor or whether you're a supporter, non-survivor, we need all the help we can get.
So this person might be someone who might want to get in touch with your organization. Absolutely. And again, we're going to have this is recorded, and it will be posted to webinarofrecovery.org, which is our webinar repository. We should have it up there in about 1 to 2 weeks. Okay. I have another question here from a user. By the way, I did get a message from Nathan. He lost his internet through a winter storm. So that's he's on the West Coast, and so I don't. Hopefully, he'll be able to get back on before we end here, but I'm not sure that that's going to happen. So here another participant asked, I was abused and ran an NGO. I asked these questions because they're very real problems. Otherwise, this is simply something to say a group did to chalk up another event outreach. I'm not sure I understand the question there. Not sure I understand that. So let me go ahead and take a look at some of these other questions here. Can you give us a brief description of what a typical intervention involves?
Yes, for sure. I'm just reading this question as well.
Okay.
Resistance from. So a typical intervention, that's a good question, because I wouldn't say that it's always the same. Like I mentioned, it could be a number of different ways that Homeland Security encounters victims. What I will say is a common theme is that it's usually not a quick process. We often, I often get questions that, well, I called in a tip to Homeland Security. why isn't there an immediate arrest made and this victim's pulled out of the situation and the SWAT team pulls up and it's case closed? And the way I like to describe it is because with human trafficking, you're dealing with a person. Oftentimes that person doesn't see themselves as a victim. It's different than, let's say, drugs, where if you have drugs, they can make a quick arrest. They've got the evidence right there. But with trafficking, it's that force, fraud, or coercion. And the last thing that law enforcement wants to do is make an arrest prematurely, and then that trafficker walks away because there's not enough evidence to lock him or her up for as long as possible. So what they want to do is, like I said, that victim-centered approach, making sure the victim is okay, making sure their basic needs are met. If they're willing to cooperate with law enforcement to help put the trafficker away, they're going to do that. And they're going to do that in the best way possible. Making sure sometimes it requires that victim to have to testify, which can be very challenging. These cases can take years to investigate. Sometimes they span over countries. There's multiple victims involved. You want to do it the right way. And even though these cases can take years to investigate, it does not mean that the victim can't get support immediately. In fact, they definitely can. There are resources out there. So that's a little bit of insight into how one might, it could be from a tip, could be from a referral.
Those investigations that you talk about, are those mainly on a federal level, or is that are there state and local community level investigations? And if it's a mix, what is, do you know what that mix is?
It is a mix. So with what I was talking about was Homeland Security investigations. So federal investigations often have a higher threshold to bring to fruition. Like one example, major case that our agency did was R. Kelly case. I don't know if you know the rapper. He was sex trafficking women and I think men as well. And that one took a lot of work, but it was successful. They got this super high profile guy into jail for pretty much the rest of his life. But there also are state and local cases. What I see, what happens most of the time is there's task forces. So state, local, federal, tribal law enforcement are working together on these cases. And if something doesn't meet the federal threshold, it may get kicked down to the state or local level, wherever they can make the easiest arrest and prosecution. So the agencies, they collaborate. You'll see task forces in different regions where they're working on these issues, and it really varies depending on the scope of the issue. If it's international, it will probably go federal, but if it's a local issue, maybe less victims, maybe that would be a state or a local law enforcement problem. But the coordination is definitely happening.
So even if it is a state and local investigation, there's still coordination with the federal level, or at least contact with the federal level to.
Yeah, that open door of communication is always happening. It's of course possible for a state and local agency to do their own human trafficking investigations, but there's also times when they need to reach out to us for continued presence, which is immigration relief given to non-citizen victims of human trafficking. And then there's also proactive outreach efforts where all of these agencies are sitting together in the same meeting. And one of the things that you'll see in our Homeland Security, also other law enforcement, federal law enforcement, is we'll have task force officers. So those are state and local officers who are deputized to work at the federal level, and they kind of act as like a liaison. Unfortunately, there's plenty of human trafficking to go around for all these agencies, but I can sleep well at night knowing that our agencies are communicating and that they're doing what's best for the victims.
Is there a manpower issue at all, as far as or do you think that there's sufficient manpower in law enforcement to conduct the investigations that need conducting?
I'm not even sure if that's the question I would ask. I don't think there is enough manpower to combat human trafficking, but I don't think that just goes with law enforcement. I think that goes with non-law enforcement. And I'm not saying that folks should go out and be Batman and investigate trafficking. I'm saying the prevention efforts should get put into there so that these law enforcement officers don't even have to do these cases, because that child knows to say no to that person who's offering them a job that seems too good to be true, or they know not to talk to that stranger on the gaming platform. And that happens before law enforcement. Like, there's no way we can arrest the problem out of existence. But the tools are in place. If someone's doing the human trafficking, we have the tools in place to hold them accountable.
And of course, also the, people who aren't directly involved in it, who see things and need to report them. And we did talk about that part. That was very important.
I have a question, Michael. Do you think that the rigorous prosecution of the traffickers serves to discourage others from taking on the job as a trafficker? Or, I mean, do you think there's any sort of secondary of gain from prosecuting other than doing justice?
Definitely a tough question. Deterrence, I think, is probably the hardest one. Is seeing this guy go to jail forever gonna make this trafficker not traffic? Maybe. I think to a certain degree, it definitely sends a clear message that, if they do it, there's a chance they're gonna go to jail for the rest of their life. I think that's probably gonna stop some people from doing it. There's also another element of deterring, which is deterring people from buying sex, because people may think it's a victimless crime, it's a harmless crime, but what they don't know is that fraud and coercion is sometimes hard to see. You may think that person is doing the commercial sex willingly, but what they might not see is behind the scenes that person is being exploited. They're being threatened if they don't engage in that commercial sex, then their family will be hurt. And then that, sex buyer is unwittingly contributing to human trafficking. And let's say that the person that they're buying sex from is a minor, then they're a human trafficker automatically. And I think that's another angle to go, is to encourage people not to buy sex, because it could be supporting human trafficking if the person on the other end isn't doing it on their own free will, or if they're a minor.
Well, I think we're sort of coming to the end here, unless we have any other questions. I I wanted to thank you for being on board with us here today, Mr. Camal. And did you have anything else, Murray?
No, I think that it's a very interesting and illuminating to see that there's so much available for victims of trafficking, and the awareness that it's going on, right under our noses, and most of us don't see it. So I think it's important to be aware that things are going on, even though you may not recognize it. And I think that's very, very helpful, and I hope helpful to victims, certainly, to get them help and get them out of being in those situations.
Have any closing statements, Michael?
No, just wanted to thank you both, and Nathan as well, for first inviting me to speak, but also highlighting the human trafficking issue, because it's often forgotten when it comes to men. And I also appreciate all the attendees for listening in, and highly recommend that they check out the Blue Campaign website, because there's a lot of resources on there that are very useful. So just again, thank you both.
Yes, and we will have all this information posted on our website, webinarofrecovery.org, and along with all the links, any links that were mentioned, will be on there as well. So we thank you very much, Mr. Camal, for joining us. Very informative and generally positive interview. It shows that these issues are being addressed. And and I thank you, Murray, too. And with that, we're going to say goodnight, and stay healthy, and we'll talk to you later.
All right, sounds good.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.